I stepped into the family lunch, clutching a flash drive that throbbed in my pocket like a live wire. 10 minutes later, the life I thought I knew dissolved into a cacophony of raised voices, stunned silences, and questions none of us were ready to face. The vinyl squeaked beneath my shoes as I entered the room, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and anticipation. This Sunday lunch was supposed to be ritualistic, comforting, a place where familial bonds were reaffirmed over heaping bowls of pasta and the endless drone of my uncle's anecdotes. But I wasn't there for the marinara or the chatter. In my pocket, the flash drive felt heavier than its weight. It held secrets, truths that promised both liberation and devastation. As the familiar scent of garlic filled the air, I wondered if those secrets might tear us apart. Yet, I knew that once shared, they could absolve me of the lie I'd been living. The challenge was, would they understand? Could they forgive? Holding the potential for endings and new beginnings in my hand, I needed to find clarity amidst the fog of fear enveloping me. I stand just inside the dining room, the warmth hitting me like a soft pillow, immediately comforting yet suffocating. The noise of chatter and laughter bounces off the walls, creating an almost tangible fog of cheer. I feel my chest tighten with every step I take deeper into the room, the familiar sense of home mingling with the overbearing aroma of overcooked garlic bread. Everyone is here, the usual suspects, cousins lounging on couches, aunts and uncles animatedly toasting with their glasses. My parents, flanking the head of the oak table, radiate a gleaming sort of happiness, their smiles earnest and engaged. I find myself swallowed into a series of obligatory embraces, each one feeling more forced than the last. My aunt pulls me in tight, her perfume, an overwhelming bouquet of artificial sweet nothings, clings to my senses like an unwelcome guest. "You've grown," someone remarks, but their voice drifts away like smoke, leaving no impression. I nod, smile, laugh in places while my mind hums with the static of anxiety. Beneath it all, beneath the mask of this ordinary, happy gathering, the weight of the flash drive in my pocket anchors me, cold and unervingly slick against my touch. It's a secret wrapped in plastic, a bomb ticking quietly as time drags on mercilessly slow. The room blurs around me, a carousel of smiles and gestures spinning out of control in slow motion. With each convulsion around the table, my grip on the simple conversation loosens alongside my resolve. "Remember when you?" Cousin Mike at the far end begins, launching into some tale I can't be bothered to recall. An exhausted nod is all I offer, my thoughts trapped between fragmented lines of future regret. My gaze flits to my parents, still blissfully unaware of the storm breaching the calm of their well-cultivated world. They've no idea, have never guessed the thickness of secrets stitched into the seams of our lives. And that invisibility, now ironically laughable, could shatter everything. As someone spills wine, the stain spider-webbing darkly across the tablecloth, I draw back into myself, tuning out the festivity droning on. The sharpness of my act grows, louder even than the gentle piano music battling the laughter. It's an odd sense of bravery and cowardice swirling like oil in my belly. With every passing second, the warmth of the room seems to close in tighter, restricting. I imagine breaking the silence, letting that cold, hard truth slip through clenched teeth, disrupting the flow of this predictable harmony. These echoes of intimacy are illusions, frail and brittle, set to crumble under the weight of what's to come. I swallow hard, tasting salt, whether from imagined tears or the pungent garlic doesn't matter. The flash drive in my pocket becomes the only solid truth as my fingers tighten around it, and it promises nothing but transformation, like plucking a string of a delicate instrument. This is a decision point, a cusp moment poised for inevitable revelation, an end as deeply rooted as this meal should have been celebratory. The flash drive pressed against my leg, a damning piece of plastic and metal as I took my place at the table. It felt too heavy in my pocket, like a ticking bomb waiting for the moment to explode. Around me, cutlery clinked against plates and indistinct voices folded into one another, a wavy blur of cheerful noise. I should have felt at home, in this chaotic symphony of family dynamics, yet all I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears. Alex's voice broke through the chatter, loud and animated, as he launched into another of his stories about work, something about his boss mispronouncing everyone's names. All eyes turned to him, laughter bubbling up at his exaggerated impressions, but my mind was elsewhere, focused internally on the silent chaos swirling just beneath my skin. I tried to mimic the casual smile plastered on everyone's faces, but I could feel the strain in my muscles, the aching tension stretching me too thin. Bits of everyone's conversations floated by. Who got the promotion? Whose kid won the science fair? All normal, all safe. Nothing like the truth I held within that made everything else seem trivial, almost painfully so. Aunts and uncles carried on with their stories, little jokes flitting back and forth like verbal tennis. My mother's voice rose above them for a moment before sinking back into the mix, another ripple in the ceaseless flow. I needed to find my way into that flow, a way to plant the truth right at its heart. But how? The thought of wrenching open that moment, exposing it to raw daylight, terror tinged with resolve twisted inside me. "Hey, have you heard about the new project Jake's doing?" someone asked, and heads turned toward me. I fumbled through a smile, managing a vague answer. "Yeah, it's going well." My words felt dry, mechanical. The pulse in my palm was insistent, a tangible reminder of the truth I held. The truth I was desperately bargaining with in my thoughts, trying to align courage and fear into a flickering moment of clarity I could use. The conversation rolled on like a river, sweeping me along its currents. Yet in my pocket, that little flash drive might as well have been a rock in my shoe, ever present with each subtle shift. This simple meal with my family, laughter, chatter, shared nostalgia. It was where I belonged, yet I was about to change it all. As Alex threw in another punchline, the laughter erupted again, a shared wave of joy and unity. And I was reaching the edge, the precipice. The truth was a shadow beside me, growing taller with each passing second. I glanced at each face, each smile, knowing that soon they would morph with the weight of what I was about to reveal. I braced myself as the room continued to hum, knowing I was seconds from unsheathing the storm within. The clattering of silverware fades into a muted backdrop as the main course arrives. It's a momentary calm, like an inhale after a day-long storm. Plates heavy with roast beef, glistening under the chandelier's glow, are set before us. My mind races, a relentless loop of what-ifs and imagined outcomes. I glance around the table, faces absorbed in ritual slices and chews, oblivious to the pressure building inside me. Each bite feels like a clock tick, propelling me toward a precipice. My heart thrums against my ribcage in an uneven symphony with the clinks and clinks of dinnerware, its beat loud in my ears, drowning out coherent thought. I know it has to be now. I need to rise, to breach the surface of this sea of unspoken words that's been drowning me for so long. I push back my chair, the sound screeching across the dining room like a siren. My knees shake as I stand, and the room freezes, every gaze directed at me. It's like a photographic flash, capturing a moment of unguarded anticipation. My mother pauses mid-slice, her smile frozen and puzzled. My siblings, forks suspended mid-air, look at me with bemused curiosity. Then there's my father, his eyes narrowing slightly, an unreadable script written in the hard lines of his gaze. I swallow, my throat parched, each syllable sticking as though caught on barbed hooks. With each halting breath, I forced my eyes from the table to my father's eyes. The words from my mind unfurl slow and deliberate. And with a voice both foreign and my own, I uttered the words that had been clawing at my conscience for far too long. Tension snaps through the air as I begin to confess, verbalizing the knot of secrets weighing heavy in my gut. Each word spoken aloud feels like a gentler reprise of a symphony, calmed by resignation. My voice, though shaky, carries an undercurrent of defiance, the teller finally claiming their truth. I cannot keep hiding. I am not the person you've come to know, the one you thought I was. The confession pours forth, my vulnerability laid bare before them. All those rehearsed speeches, late at night, alone in the dark, unraveled differently in the light of their scrutiny. Each breath now is a lifeline, drawing me up for air, making me braver than I'd ever thought feasible. Anticipation is a palpable force, thickening the space between us. The reactions, unspoken, yet drumming as loudly as my heart. Silent unravelings of the family we knew. I stand there, words suspended in the stillness, before closing my lips on the silence. Waiting. I'm suspended on the precipice of whatever comes next, the the family tableau forever altered by the decision I'd long feared and dreamed of. The room is a mosaic of complexity, each face a portrait of emotions I struggle to read. This is merely the beginning, a doorway cracked open, inviting in a new narrative to spill through. The room was a graveyard of unopened boxes, relics of our stagnant life, each of us immobilized in the shadows of what had just transpired. My father's eyes were locked on the flash drive in my hand, a small, innocuous piece of technology that weighed as much as our tethered breaths. He didn't move. None of us did. The clock ticked like a judge's gavel, pacing out the seconds of silence that followed my revelation, each one stretching into its own eternity. I extended my arm, breaking the invisible wall between us. The drive dangled between my fingers, a pendulum swinging back and forth like an invitation, or a threat. The symbolism was not lost on me. This was more than a simple object. It was the embodiment of everything I had uncovered. Everything I shouldn't have had to know. His eyes finally left the flash drive, flickering up to meet mine with the kind of quiet devastation that seeps into your bones, making a home there. There was a tremor in his fingers as he reached forward, and for a brief, surreal moment, I thought he might refuse to take it. But he did, and when he closed his hand around it, I felt something lurch inside me, as if a tether had snapped. The entire world contracted around us. The air seemed to thicken, curling in on itself, pressing against my skin. It felt like the room was holding its breath, just like us, poised delicately on the precipice, waiting for someone to break the spell. My mother stood to the side, her face a perfect canvas of disbelief etched onto dispassionate skin. I didn't dare look at my siblings. I couldn't handle their eyes on me right now. Not when even my own heartbeat felt like an accusation. The hushed chaos was so thick in the air that I half expected to hear it crack. I thought. And in that suspended moment, we all became prisoners of the space I'd created. The enormity of what I'd set into motion was terrifying. It was like watching a storm roll in, knowing that every stripe of lightning you see is counting down to thunder's scream, yet still startling when it hits. I felt the velocity of my decision like a freight train pulling into the station, irrevocable and overwhelming. I wanted desperately to hear my father's voice, to find something human in this smog of revelations and shadows, a word to anchor us. But there was nothing, only his gaze still pinned to the drive with the weight of his thoughts, visible and crackling in the air between us. He looked at me again, a question unspoken, maybe unintended, reflected in the wetness of his eyes. I held his stare, the space between us both minuscule and infinite. In that silence, acceptance wasn't just about acknowledging the truth. It was about surrendering to its consequences, to the unraveling that was just beginning. None of us knew what would happen next, but there was no turning back. We were already in the heart of the storm. The air in the room thickened as the silence stretched, a fragile web of anticipation about to snap. My father's eyes were locked on the flash drive in his hand, fingers trembling slightly, as though even holding it too long might scald him. There was a sense of wariness in his posture, an open wound he couldn't quite bring himself to touch. It's true, then? His voice cracked the silence, each word sitting heavy, anchored in disbelief. All this, you knew, and you didn't say anything? How long? His eyes darted to meet mine, searching for something, an explanation, or maybe a lie he could anchor himself to. Around us, the family shifted uneasily in their seats, the creak of leather competing with the quiet murmur of the living room clock. My mother's gaze was fixed on me, wide and unblinking, her breath held in a still life of denial. The air felt electric, charged with the weight of dormant secrets now clamoring for space. It wasn't meant to be like this. My voice came out a whisper, almost swallowed by the tension. I could hear my heart pounding, a steady drumbeat of dread. I thought keeping it hidden would spare you, spare us. I was wrong. 12 years, he said, his words stark and empty, more to himself than anyone else. The number hung there like an echo, reverberating through the room, pulling at the threads of every shared memory. The questions, sharp like arrows, pierced the fragile air between us, each one a marker of forgotten promises and newfound betrayals. His words seemed invasive, puncturing the illusion of peace we'd all worked so hard to maintain. How could you keep this from us? It wasn't simple, I replied, trying to steady my voice against the rising tide of emotion within me. Every day, I wanted to tell you. I tried, but it was like quicksand, pulling me deeper every time I thought I saw a way out. My sister, perched on the edge of her chair, eyes darting between us as if she were watching a tableau unfold, interrupted with a quiet, "So what now? What's left after all this?" Her words seemed to halt time for a moment, the world narrowing to that tiny, worn flash drive, still resting in my father's palm. It felt as though everything about our family, our shared existence, had been concentrated into that small, metallic object. "We move on," my father finally breathed, a resolution in his voice coated with something like sadness. "But first, we need to understand. We need to talk." There was a rumble of agreement or nods, a collective sigh that hinted at an uncertain future, framed by doubts and questions yet to be answered. And through the dampened clatter and rising voices, I understood that the fallout was only just beginning. But for now, seated around the room's silent epicenter, all we had were the unresolved echoes of the truth. The sound of the clock seemed louder than ever, echoing in the silence that stretched between us before everything shattered. My voice, a trembling thread of resolve, carried accusations across the table and jerked us from plastic politeness into the raw, savage truth. Not a word from my mother at first. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, caught mine like a deer staring down headlights, and I almost wished I hadn't said anything. But it was too late. I watched as the realization seeped in, her strong facade cracking as tears welled up. I felt a pang of guilt, my own need to liberate myself now feeling like a betrayal of the person who'd held me in her arms, but I couldn't back down now. The lies had choked me too long. My aunts and uncles shifted, uncomfortable in their seats, veterans of family drama, now suddenly actors in a play that had taken an unexpected turn. Their eyes darted between one another, each of them processing the chaos with the detached acknowledgement that comes from having your own truths to hide. I could see vulnerabilities exposed like open wounds, unnamed, but bleeding all the same. Someone cleared their throat, the noise sharp and jarring, and the room erupted. Raised voices clashed like cymbals crashing in a discordant symphony. Fingers pointed across the table, sharp accusations and denials bouncing off the walls, as if echoing back the years of suppressed tension. My uncle's booming voice cut through it all, demanding logic, demanding proof, as if evidence alone could repair a bridge that had already burnt to ash. I remained silent, holding my ground, letting their collective outrage wash over me. My mind wandered, tracing back through the years of family dinners, the hushed whispers behind closed doors. It was all so clear now, the patterns I'd chosen to ignore, woven into the very fabric of who we were. I tried to break free, and now all of us were tangled in threads of truth, with no one left untouched. My mother's tears flowed freely now, her hands shaking as she reached for a tissue. "Is this how you repay everything I've done for you?" Her voice was small, and I could hear the cracks around the edges, like someone trying to stick plaster over shattered glass. "I didn't want this," I whispered, almost to myself. But she heard, and the statement hung in the air between us like a punch that's barely pulled. Amidst the whirlwind of raised voices and silent tears, I realized that the truth was its own beast, ferocious, uncontrollable, and with teeth that sank deep. It could ruin us or redefine us, and I wasn't sure which fate frightened me more. Each breath felt like a gamble, as the words continued to fly like debris in a storm, leaving no stone unturned. And still, more remained unsaid, lurking beneath the surface, waiting to create its own chaos. The dining room was dim, draped in shadows that seemed to breathe with an unsettling rhythm. I watched as the flash drive slid into the laptop's port with a soft click, the sound somehow echoing like a gunshot in the silence that followed. The screen blinked to life, casting an eerie glow that fractured the room into shards of blue and gray. Faces around the table flickered, pale, tense, and stripped of their familiar warmth. My heart thudded heavy in my chest, each beat a countdown to the inevitable. On the screen, folders opened with mechanical indifference, revealing their secrets in stark, pixelated clarity. The first image appeared, its colors stark and cruel under the screen's harsh light. Beside me, someone inhaled sharply, the sound slicing through the heavy air like a knife. Emails followed, lines of text scrolling upwards, each word adding weight to the atmosphere, pressing down on us until breathing itself felt like a betrayal. Beneath the cold glow, faces that once held laughter twisted into masks of disbelief and hurt. The truth, raw and unyielding, stripped away the layers we had carefully built over years of shared stories and inside jokes, leaving only the bare bones of betrayal exposed. The harsh light painted shadows on faces that looked unfamiliar, as though this truth had stripped away their humanity, leaving only echoes of who we were. I could feel eyes on me, probing, questioning, each glance a silent accusation. My skin prickled, the sensation crawling like 1,000 insects beneath the surface. I wanted to speak, to fill the void left by this revelation, shatter the silence that now crackled with unspoken words and unspent anger. But my mouth was dry, glued shut by the fear that anything I said would only confirm the worst suspicions. Is this? The voice, usually so warm and steady, trembled now, cracked open by disbelief. Words hung in the air like a challenge, daring anyone to confirm or deny them, but no one moved. Eyes met mine, dark and searching, trying to gauge innocence or guilt from a face that felt foreign even to me. In that moment, sitting under the blue light's relentless exposure, the lines between who I was and who they believed me to be blurred. I was both the person they trusted and a stranger cloaked in shadows, my intentions and actions twisted by the images on the screen. The tension built, a coiled snake ready to strike, and I felt something inside stretch to breaking point. Every stifled sob, every biting accusation was a thread pulling tighter. Then, without warning, the power flickered. Darkness rushed back in, swallowing the room whole, leaving us in a cocoon of whispered breaths and muffled gasps. But the truth, now unleashed and living amongst us, refused to fade into the night. It lingered, an invisible presence between us, marking this moment as the fracture point, the beginning of everything falling apart. The room felt larger somehow, stretched thin by the divide between sides we didn't know existed, a quiet rift growing in the absence of shared understanding. I leaned against the wall, my shoulders heavy with the silence that weighed us all down. A low buzz of tension hummed beneath the occasional sharp words exchanged. This was not an evening about gentle reparations or understandings discovered in hushed tones. No, this was war on a different battlefield. Dad stood by the window, his silhouette hardened against the fading light outside, arms crossed over his chest. His eyes, usually so full of warmth and laughter, now dug trenches into whoever dared meet his gaze. I watched his fingers tap impatiently against his bicep, each tap echoing a silent demand for answers nobody was ready to give. Why didn't you say anything before? My sister, Anna, voice sharp like shattered glass, finally cut through the thick air between us. Her gaze bounced between us, desperate for some kind of dawning truth. She needed the comfort of logic, as if reasoning could sew up the wreckage. No one knew. Mom's voice came from somewhere deep within the shadows of the room, where she sat partially hidden. She spoke softly, her words half swallowed by the heavy curtain of silence. There was something in the low timbre of her voice, a plea, an exhaustion that resonated beyond just words. Anna wasn't having it. No one knew, she repeated, disbelieving. Her eyes shone with unshed tears, a defiant refusal to break in front of us. The rest of us were divided, allies without allegiance. Sideways glances communicated alliances shifting beneath the surface, unspoken agreements of who was right and who was wrong. Sometimes things just are, Mom added, almost to herself, leaning forward, hands clasped tightly. Her eyes scanned the room, collecting the dust of shattered trust. In the corner, my brother sat silent, observing. Lost in thought or numb, it was hard to tell. He'd withdrawn into himself, and his silence spoke volumes more than words could. In that stillness, there was an acceptance, however reluctant, tinged with a contempt for our inability to yet again scrape any resemblance of unity from the chaos. The walls seemed to breathe with us, an unsteady rhythm of hurt and questions. Beneath the noise, a sense of foreboding settled. This was a breaking point, a before and after moment in the making. I could feel it in my bones, in the marrow of our shared blood. Somewhere deep inside, there flickered, briefly, just briefly, the old echoes of laughter and warmth. But they were quickly overrun by this new reality. Dad turned away from the window, his face hard, yet betraying a flicker of vulnerability. "We're a family," he said, voice soft, almost a whisper against the backlit twilight, as if trying to recollect an unbroken vow. And though his words might as well have been thrown into the void for all their weight, for a fleeting moment, there was unity in just trying to bridge that chasm. The chaos faded into the background like a distant storm, but inside me, a new turbulence was brewing, the thrill of truth mingling uneasily with the ash-coated remnants of what I'd destroyed. The room was a battlefield, conversations erupting like gunfire, each voice pitch higher, laced with accusations and denials. I stood at the edge, a shadow lurking at the peripheral of their fervor, feeling both present and detached. Their words seemed muffled, like I was underwater, submerged in a sea of my making. I watched them, eyes flickering from face to face, searching for a sign, maybe a flicker of understanding, or even blame that I could clutch onto. But there was only confusion masking resentment, a thick fog of emotions that neither of us could navigate. I felt the weight of their eyes occasionally dart toward me, suspicion surfacing for a breath before being swallowed by the bitter whirlpool again. I should have been panicked, wrought with shame, but instead, a strange, twisted sense of relief settled over me. I was an outsider here, but perhaps I always had been. The realization was a quiet undertone beneath the cacophony. What I'd done had finally stripped away the pretenses, leaving nothing but raw truth. The guilt was there, gnawing at the edges, but so was a peculiar lightness, as if I'd shed a second skin that had clung too closely for too long. I could see the cracks I'd caused in the facade they all clung to, fragile before and now shattered. Yet, there was something almost liberating in that destruction. It was like watching a phoenix rise from its own ashes, unsure of its new form, but thrilling in its existence nonetheless. I tucked my hands into my pockets, feeling the warmth of the blood rushing through my fingertips, a reminder that I was still here, still part of this, no matter how far I'd distanced myself. Trying to gather the remnants of my own composure, I focused on the sensation, grounding myself in the tactile even as I drifted through the surreal. Laughter erupted suddenly, harsh and bitter, cutting through the tension. My brother, looking straight past me, his words a jibe more at himself than at the rest. "Maybe now we can all stop pretending, huh?" His voice held a weight that made my heart thud, a shared understanding in his words that clutched at my throat. I felt an urge to respond, to confirm that connection, but the words stuck in my mouth, calcified by the fear of what they might unravel further. Instead, I nodded almost imperceptibly, the only acknowledgement I could muster in the moment. As the room settled into a quieter storm, a new silence swelled between breaths, uneasy, yet somehow filled with possibilities. The aftermath was shadowy and indistinct, but perhaps it was a starting point, the first step on an uncharted path that had no promise of redemption, but whispered of a chance for a different kind of truth. The hum of voices had faded, leaving a pregnant silence that pressed into my ears like the memory of an echo. I traced the grain of the wooden table with my fingertip, the surface cool against my skin, and stared at the sunlight inching its way across the tablecloth, brushing against the dishes that remained untouched. It seemed to transform everything it touched, these diffused beams casting long shadows across the abandoned remnants of our confrontation, turning the scene into a still life of regret and loss. My father sat opposite me, his presence a solid, impenetrable wall built on years of unresolved anger and miscommunication. The silence between us was dense. He cleared his throat, a sharp, jarring sound in the stillness. His eyes, a mirror of my own, scanned the room, avoiding mine, taking in the abandoned chairs, the half-empty glasses still resonating with words that had spilled too violently from our lips. The space between us felt like an entire ocean, yet I could sense the weariness in his posture, the slump of his broad shoulders that seemed unfamiliar in their vulnerability. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught somewhere in my throat. I wanted to address the hurt, the gap that had stretched so far and so wide, threatening to push us into different, irreparable worlds. Instead, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and watched it shiver in the air like a whispered plea. He glanced at me then, a flicker of something guarded in his gaze, an acknowledgement of our collective wounds. It wasn't an invitation, but it was at least an opening, a crack in the armor that had taken years to weld shut. In that moment, I was flooded with remembered warmth, brief flashes of laughter and late-night conversations before resentments made laughter hard, when he was more than a figure cast in shadow. "Dad?" My voice was too soft, almost lost in the cavernous quiet. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, prepared speeches, rehearsed scenarios where I bridged the chasm with an easy charm I had never truly possessed. But reality was less cinematic, much rawer. Real bridges required real effort, and all I had was this fragile connection beginning with shaky words. He didn't answer, not directly, not with words, but the way he straightened in his chair, the deep, slow breath he took. It was something. Perhaps just the memory of who we used to be trying to find purchase in the present. As the light continued its relentless advance, I wondered if we, too, could find a way back to who we were supposed to be. If we could gather these scattered pieces, or if they'd always remain unfound, fragments of truth we almost spoke and the healing we almost began. I slowly reached across the table, my hand stretching toward his, and felt the trembling uncertainty dance along my skin. This wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't even understanding, but maybe it was the first step, cautious, hopeful, towards something like peace.